you think the public sees test pilots?
Well, I'm pretty sure the public think that we're a crazy bunch of lunatics that get into the air at the least provocation, fly anything anybody cares to ask us to fly, for instance, they imagine, I think, that on first flights you just zip off, you immediately rush up to maximum speed in the aeroplane, see how fast it'll go, all sorts of crazy things of that sort. Of course, it's just nothing like that at all. Nothing at all.
Sunrise on April the 9th, 1969, the morning of a test flight of Concorde 002, the English prototype to be flown by John Cochrane, co-pilot, and Brian Trubshaw, chief test pilot of the British Aircraft Corporation. Two men involved with the Concorde for the last 5 years.
I like these dashes you make along the runway, Trub.
What?
It says that you made a couple of perfect dashes down the runway. I see technicians were working all night.
Oh, yeah.
That's not unusual.
They were on the news with the same jazz, too.
That's what I've been working all night.
They're quite incredible.
We've got a mastermind computer which keeps a check on all the thousands of parts and the systems in the airplane. It's a rather optimistic way of describing the ADC, isn't it? Yeah. Some of these guys really get it all wrong, don't they?
How do you feel now about the fact that at long last this plane is off the drawing board, going to go into the air, and the fact that you are now going to be able to get out of an office seat and into the pilot's seat and test it and fly it for the next couple of days?
Relief.
Why?
It's been a long, hard grind getting this thing to this point. It's not an easy airplane. It's not easy working on an international basis. Lots of everybody's running about behind the scenes trying to get their fingers into the pie. And it'll do everybody good when this thing flies.
For Trubshaw and Cochrane, perhaps the most important and certainly the most publicised first flight of their careers. Brian Trubshaw, 45, old Wickhamist, RAF bomber pilot, test pilot for 19 years, a bachelor, now about to fly the world's most expensive prototype. Even now it wasn't certain he would fly. The day before there'd been minor faults and he intended to do one more high-speed taxi run before taking off. Even with engines running and Concorde beginning to roll, the question still remains, will he simply taxi or will he fly? And so, on the afternoon of April the 9th, Concorde 002 flew for the first time after 7 years' development. For Brian Trubshaw, preparations began almost as long ago. A pilot must be as prepared as his aircraft. Trubshaw has spent 27 years flying, understands the need for experience, fitness, and the testing of every sort of equipment, like his new survival suit. Does he consider the time when it may be needed?
Only on special occasions.
Like what sort of special occasion?
When we're flying at high altitude and over the sea.
Have you ever had to use equipment like that?
No, thank goodness.
In what sort of circumstances can you imagine having to on test flights like this?
Well, I can only imagine it being a possibility if it's with a really disastrous failure of an airplane, structural failure or an extremely bad fire in the air or something like that, because it's in almost every other circumstance you would, I believe, be able to get the aircraft back to an airfield somewhere along the route.
Flying an extremely expensive and valuable piece of equipment like this Is there a sort of different priority? Have you got to try even harder to get the plane down on the ground again in one piece rather than bailing out?
No, I don't think it comes to that. I don't think the expense of the piece of equipment is relevant to the case at all. I think really it depends very much on how many crew members you're carrying on any airplane, just where your decision points come up along any particular path. For example, with a single-seat aircraft, it's the abandoning of the aircraft is a far less serious business than if you're carrying a crew. And the bigger the crew, the more important it is to get the airplane back on the ground, I believe. I don't think it's that you're unconscious of the fact that the airplane is an expensive piece of equipment, but that's not the thing that makes the decision difficult.
Is all this tailor-made for you?
Some of the inside the immersion suit is a partial pressure suit, and that's tailor-made within reason and then adjusted.
Is it comfortable?
It's very hot.
It's taken all the design, planning and technical resources of the British Aircraft Corporation and Sud Aviation 7 years to build Concorde. It's the most advanced civil aircraft in the world. Every detail has been computed, is as technically, mechanically and aerodynamically correct as human and electronic ingenuity can make it. It's tested in a mock-up of the flight deck. Yet in the end, Concorde will be flown by men, and sometimes men disagree with computers.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, that's one other thing I don't know whether you've seen, and that's that takeover line which has grown up on the console, on the combing panel, which is hooked up to the auto-flight control system. I don't know what you feel about it. I feel it's far too massive and.
I think it's a daft arrangement.
Yes.
You did object to the brilliant flash you're going to get from the gun.
I
realise it's only short duration.
Yes, and I don't particularly care how long the duration is. I think setting off a flashing red light of high intensity right in the pilot's eyes at night is one of the stupidest ideas I've ever come across.
Rollout day, September the 12th, 1968. No aircraft has ever trailed such clouds of publicity or been surrounded by such political storms and financial uncertainty. The press was there, as indeed it had been at every stage of the development. When there have been no pictures to take, there have been words. Angry words about the climbing costs, the noise, the supersonic bang, about whether it could ever be a commercial proposition. Even its first public viewing caused a row. Anthony Wedgwood Benn, the Minister of Technology, wasn't there and complained furiously about not being invited to the rolling out ceremony. But not everyone loves Concorde. An anti-Concorde campaign was started. There were questions in Parliament, discreet rows with the French, many attempts to cancel the whole project. And in the middle of it all, Brian Trubshaw and John Cochrane, chosen to fly Concorde because they're good pilots and not good public performers, suddenly found themselves projected as stars, with all that involves.
How does it feel to be going on board?
Well, it isn't the first time, because we did go on board down in Toulouse.
Is she as good as you thought she looked inside the hangar?
It's the first time I've seen this particular one outside, but I think it looks very fine.
What do you think it's going to be like on the first flight?
I don't think it'll be different from lots of other aeroplanes.
Of course, you're already quite familiar with the Concorde, having had that experience with Mr. Turcot in France.
That's right.
But it's a great day for you anyway.
Oh, it is. It's a great step forward.
And a great
outside on its wheels and being towed around.
And a great step for the British aircraft industry as well.
It is indeed. Can we go on board?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you turn round, sir, before you go up, sir? Mr. Trubshaw, would you turn round?
Gentlemen, even more down, do you think? Can we come down to the platform? Onto the platform, just there, please. We can see Concorde above your heads.
And after this slightly coy exposure to a pack of snapping photographers, Concorde withdrew once more into privacy for its engine tests. So it was a breathless Britain saw Concorde for the first time. An exercise that in the end proved only that the plane did exist and its wheels went round. And for Brian Trubshaw, a chance to test the controls under tow at 5 miles an hour and the comfort of his seat.
Have you had a nice ride, Mr. Trubshaw? Have you had a nice ride? Is it comfortable?
What?
Is it comfortable?
Not particularly.
What's going on here now?
I'm not too sure at all. I think they're trying to find a way of parking it on the balance.
How did you like being surrounded by press photographers this morning?
Not very much.
Do you get a lot of that sort of thing?
Not bad. No, it's not too bad, really. Doesn't happen very often.
Do you mind the idea of being lionized?
I don't mind after you've done something. I prefer for it not to happen until after the event.
Red or green, Your Honor?
Neither better than the other. Definitely red. Definitely green.
Good. Right, sure. Bottom line for you, I think.
Left to right, APH, TX, ZNU. I can't read anything.
Then second round up.
Right to left, TXF, DNZU.
For John Cochrane, like all pilots, the greatest worry is his own physical fitness. It's more likely there will be a fault in the man than the machine in these days of computers and sophisticated electronics. Designers check and recheck aircraft, so doctors must check and recheck men. A man who fails can no longer be a test pilot, and who wants a test pilot who can't fly?
Bottom line backwards, doctors.
Bottom line, right to left, UNZ, XTHPA.
Brian Trubshaw is not only the man who will fly Concorde, he's also Director of Flight Operations in the British Aircraft Corporation. Most of his work is behind a desk, but he takes every chance of swapping his executive chair for a pilot's seat, even when it's only the first flight to check out a new VC-10.
Why is it that a high-powered chief test pilot like yourself is doing what must be a routine job?
Well, I'm doing this particular flight, really, just to make sure that I do keep current on the VC-10. And at the present time, we don't have very many VC-10s coming through. And so we do have to take opportunities to keep ourselves in practice on this particular type. Otherwise, we are firstly, well, out of practice ourselves, and we would also lose our right to fly the airplane.
For a man who's won 5 awards for bravery in test flying, taking a VC-10 up for the first time may seem no more challenging than backing a car out of a garage.
You're all set on your panel, Dennis.
Golf Hudson, Sierra Golf is cleared for takeoff. After takeoff, right turn out heading 240 degrees.
Does flying ever become a reflex action like driving a car?
Would you mind repeating that? I was listening to the radio.
Does flying ever become a sort of reflex action like driving a car, or are there too many things to think about, like that radio message you just had to hear?
Well, it becomes part of you, but you've got to remain pretty alert all the time. Instead of getting sort of marlish about it, that's when you have an accident.
Does it ever get boring, though?
Some of it can get a bit boring, but most of our flying is full of variety, so it's quite good.
How much do you look forward to it when you find yourself desk-bound for a while?
I look forward to it pretty considerably, I can tell you.
While Brian Trubshaw delivers a new plane, his co-pilot John Cochrane carries on with the routine development work on Concorde.
Now, right, small one at on the rear door. It's nothing serious at all. It can be deferred till completion of engine run.
In spite of the millions of pounds invested, the thousands of technicians working on the plane, the best programme developments sometimes have snags.
Oh, it's a crack.
It's a small crack.
Crack in the door.
Yeah. On the hinge bracket. Yeah.
Keep running along there.
Oh, yeah. Is it stainless steel?
Yeah. We're in the line, you crack along there.
This one hasn't done enough running to have done that. Is that a manufacturing fault?
Oh, I think it's inherent, I think. It's just been, you know.
Until now, Concorde has been in the hands of the designers and technicians. Today, for the first time, the pilots take over. With 4 months to go to takeoff, it's time to see if Concorde's engines really work, or if it's back to the drawing board.
What are you actually going to do now, Mr. Cochrane?
I'm just about to get into my seat to see what the situation is and check with the flight engineer. Just the state of his checks at the moment before we settle down and check intercom with the bunker and then clear the area before we start engine. So once I can get onto the flight deck and get access to my seat, then I'll be able to sit down and gather my wits about me.
As far as you're concerned, what do the engine runs consist of? What sort of work do you have to do?
Well, it's mostly, from our point of view, divides into two categories. The safety of the aircraft is of prime importance, because you realize you can damage an airplane during these initial ground runnings very easily. And secondly, it's a question of going through a very carefully controlled schedule, making sure that the correct indications on the flight deck and the correct recordings are achieved in the bunker.
Concorde Control Centre, where every detail of every test is fed into computers for analysis. This is the time when theory is proved or disproved, each success another step towards actually flying.
Secondly, nozzles, open, number 1.
Today they broke all records during ground engine runs and blew down a wall. It was a baffle wall meant to reduce the noise for the local residents. One spurt on the throttle and 50 feet of it fell down on Lovers Lane.
What about the wall, Mr. Cochrane? Would that worry you at all?
About the wall? No, it's not my wall, you see. No, it's as long as wasn't creating any problem with pieces of concrete lifting in the air and coming near the aircraft, I was quite happy. We've got it well covered with people watching there, and it just means that we've got to put a new wall up.
Does that sort of thing hold you up at all, though, or make a nuisance?
Well, yeah, it's you've got to obviously be very careful to make that it's not either creating a hazard to life outside the airfield, which we did with the police, or that it's creating any possibility of a danger to the airplane. And but again, we don't want to stop it's an expensive business to have to stop the runs to build a new wall. So let's just let the wall fall down and get on with the job. I think that's the only way of playing it.
We decided to bring it. All right, on you go.
Trubshaw has worked on the development of both military and civil aircraft. He led the teams that tested the Viscount, the Vanguard and the BAC-111, and also the one that tested the VC-10.
We came on a 3-engine ferry.
3-engine ferry?
Yeah.
Why is that?
because we couldn't start them before.
It's all very well being laconic about flying on 3 engines, but there have been times when all has gone very wrong indeed, as when it seemed the prototype VC-10 must crash.
Yeah, well, we were conducting some stalling tests on the prototype VC-10 as part of the development and certification program. And we suffered in the course of one of these tests a structural failure to the bracket attachment to one of the 4 elevators. The elevators are the control which makes the aeroplane go up and down in pitch. And this introduced a very tremendous vibration in the aeroplane. And I must say that I thought the whole thing was going to come apart. It was quite disturbing on the flight deck. The whole airplane was doing this sort of business, and it was very difficult to even read any of the instruments. And it was quite clear that we had suffered some pretty major problem. So my first thoughts were really that the aeroplane would come apart, and that one was more concerned about saving the crew.
What seemed after about a lifetime, I managed to get a hold of the switch, operate it to switch the control off.
Roy Mole, engineer on that flight.
Although it's the right control surface, the fault was such that switching this particular PC off didn't stop it, and I carried on and isolated the specially opposite one. At this stage, Trubby was getting the speed off. He also blew the escape door, which caused the whole aircraft to fill up with water vapor. So we're just all enveloped in cloud because we have a 7-pound differential on. We were told to bail out, but unfortunately nobody could get out of the seat because we were literally being shaken around like peas in a pod. Trubby managed to get the speed back, and the aircraft came out of it all right.
Were you frightened on that occasion?
Yes, I think I was actually probably scared stiff, but strange as it might seem, I suppose probably due to the training that you get in doing this job, one quite quickly took account of oneself and the situation, and one's only thoughts were not really directed to whether one was frightened, but what was the right thing to do.
How do you like flying with Trubby? Very good indeed. I think I've got more confidence in him than any other man I've ever flown with.
Why?
Well, I went through the whole of this stall program, in which Trubby did a tremendous amount. I suppose in all now I must be approaching 2,000 odd stalls on this aeroplane. Here's a man that strikes me as got command of the situation. I mean, I'm not saying the other people that I fly with are not as good. But you asked me the question what I thought of flying with him, and fair enough, I think he's a good man to fly with.
The best?
Yep.
One of the worst test flight disasters was in 1963 when the prototype BAC-111 crashed on Salisbury Plain, killing all 7 people on board.
There was a problem which arose from the aeroplane getting to what is in technical terms a very high angle of attack. And this resulted in the loss of control.
The aircraft just developed a very high rate of descent at a very high incidence and continued in that regime until it hit the ground.
What does that mean in layman's language? What's a very high incidence?
Well, in this case, instead of, to put it simply, I think it's instead of flying in a forward direction, the aircraft's flying rather like a lift. It's just coming straight down.
In fact, it just hit the ground in a very, very flat attitude at very low forward speed. In fact, it hit the ground pretty well level and the forward speed was so low that it only moved forward about the length of the fuselage from first impact to where it stopped. And of course the rate of impact with the ground was very high. Fuel tanks obviously ruptured and this type of thing, and the airplane caught fire and was completely burnt out.
How much does it disturb you when this sort of thing happens, especially to your colleagues?
Well, it upset everybody here tremendously because we lost some particularly fine people in that accident. They were fine people as men, and they were also fine in terms of their technical ability. And it left a very great gap, both in our organizational standpoint, and also we lost a lot of very good friends.
For Trubshaw and Cochrane, a break in the preparation to fly 002 and a trip to Toulouse for the first flight of 001, the twin prototype Concorde built by Sud Aviation. It was always agreed that the French plane should fly first, so this trip was to remind the world that it was the result of Anglo-French cooperation. The maiden flight of Concorde was not so much a test flight as a carnival. The French invited photographers and newsmen from all over the world to Toulouse in February, a time of year when the weather's uncertain, the timing of the flight unpredictable. The press sat and waited for 5 days as wind and cloud gave way to fog. If it was frustrating for the press, it was even more so for Trubshaw and Cochrane, who weren't even going to have the consolation of flying. The nearest they did come to flying was a training spell in the fearfully expensive simulator of the Concorde flight deck. One of the many irritations of the project is that there's only this one simulator, and it's the Englishmen who have to go backwards and forwards.
I'll try and do this one with the light on. Okay.
Okay. Coming through 50 feet. You're perfect on altitude. Parachute.
Reverse.
I have reverse.
After some routine exercises, a hair-raisingly bumpy simulated landing. Not the only moment of drama they've had.
Oh, we've had some terrific smash-ups. Failed to arrive on the runway. We've had a failure once of the simulator itself, where the whole device finished up hard against the wall, and everybody was trapped in here for about an hour. So you have to be quite careful, actually, in this thing, with any simulator, with these motion systems. If they get a failure in the motion and we get a runaway, you can actually get quite sort of high accelerations on the individuals in here, and that's why we're strapped in, just as if we were flying.
What's been the most spectacular sort of pseudo-disaster you've had in it?
Well, we had one where something went wrong with the actual simulator and we spun into the middle of Toulouse. And on the visual display, it was possible to see the houses, and we landed right out in the middle of them.
At last, the wind dropped, the sun shone, and the circus hit town. The test flight of a new, untried aircraft, improbably exposed to the world's cameras and best-loved British-made commentators.
In service flying, that, of course, will be retracted to improve the streamlining for transonic flight. But for the purpose of this maiden flight, it will stay in the landing configuration designed to improve the forward visibility of the flight deck crew. Also, Turcar will not retract the undercarriage on this first flight.
Brian, you've been tied up with the Concorde almost in the beginning. How did you feel when you saw it actually take to the air today for the first time?
It was a great moment.
Well, I was very, I had a great sense of relief and not a little pride to be associated with it, because I think I probably thought that the event in itself would be a bit of an anticlimax, but as it turned out, I found it was really quite an emotional experience in some way, yes.
I hope our first flight goes as well.
Le Concorde est en cours d'atterrissage. Regardez sur vos écrans de télévision ce magnifique oiseau de proie.
And so, after 43 minutes, André Turcar brings Concorde 001 back to Earth. For Brian Trubshaw, chief test pilot and an executive of the British Aircraft Corporation, at least there was a ringside seat and the consolation of a flip in the company helicopter. His main function, like that of those few other Englishmen present, was to remind the world that on this day of French glory, it was a joint project. The Concorde was an Anglo-French achievement. It was not the easiest of jobs. So André Turcar, with due Gallic modesty, acknowledged the plaudits of the multitudes, a Louis XIV of the supersonic age who came down from his chateau and paintings to write his name in the pages of history. Meanwhile, Brian Trubshaw waited to fulfill his real function in the ceremonial, to shake Turcar warmly by the hand. But was that really all there was for Britain's top test pilot to do?
Well, you see, at the moment, we're just here to give what help we can, to understand what's going on, and we do not really play a real part in the fundamental decisions of flying this airplane. But we're also looking at this from what we know is going to probably happen to us. And we may be very bloody-minded, because I think that this performance, which surrounds this first flight of 001, is wrong. I don't agree with it, and I realize that in saying that to you, I'm stating it publicly, but I am absolutely opposed to this, and it is possible that I shall refuse to allow a similar activity for 002.
Presumably the flag circuit is what trips the ADC warnings, audios and everything else, because you...
That's right. That's right.
And it won't reset.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the other thing. I mean, it's not livable.
We tried to reset it on the first run.
Like 3 or 4 times.
And he failed.
Even though Concorde 001's first flight was successful, there was still work to be done on 002, as here during the taxiing trials to sort out last-minute faults.
Second run, 92 knots, bang, out it goes.
On the first trial, the warning light indicated an engine fire that existed only in a computer's imagination. On the second run, a far from imaginary tire burst. It was all just like Toulouse, only in Toulouse the world's press waited for the weather, while in Bristol they waited for the taxiing trials to end. Trials that many said should have been carried out in decent privacy, were watched and reported by those whose sole aim appeared to be to find fault, or at least a story. Every minor irritation and delay became news, just like in Toulouse, But this time Brian Trubshaw resigned himself to it all.
Well, one's just accepted it now. And one says, well, okay, you can't stop it and you've got to live with it. But frankly, I don't take much notice of it.
You laughed, John. Have you accepted it?
Well, I haven't got any choice about it. I think, as Brian says, it's just a fact of life on this on this project, and it's particularly at this time. There's no sense in getting disturbed about it.
Who's going to make the final decision as to when you do actually take off?
I do. And nobody else.
As the days passed, anticipation and pressure increased. The high-speed taxiing trials saw a computer failure. Every private problem had to be solved in public, and there were times when even the phlegmatic Trubshaw needed to get away for a few hours, as he does most weekends, to a friend's farm in Surrey. He's a bachelor, and this is the nearest thing he has to family life. After all, the pressures and dangers of test flying don't mix well with marriage.
Well, it all seems a very long way from flying supersonic aeroplanes to mucking out donkeys.
Well, it's a different way of spending the weekend, I must say.
Do you find it sort of a necessary thing to do, to unwind and get away from the strains of being a test pilot?
I think it's a very good thing to get away occasionally and do something quite different and be with different people, and you don't talk about aeroplanes all the time.
What do you talk about down here? Donkeys?
No, not donkeys. Everything except aeroplanes.
Trubby is so matter-of-fact about flying and testing new aircraft that one gets the feeling it's almost more dangerous to oil a donkey's hoof than to fly an aeroplane.
I don't do that. Peppy. Peppy. Sit down.
How excited, how stimulated are you when you're sitting there in a plane the first time it's going to fly and you're going to take it up for the very first time? Is this a moment when the adrenaline rate leaps up?
It leaps up a bit, yes. But it's still just part of a chain, and it's a very difficult thing to describe how I personally feel on this, because, you see, we've spent so much time with the aeroplane during its build stage, and particularly in the case of the Concorde, we've done all the engine running ground tests ourselves with the help of specialized engineers. And we sat in this thing so much now that the first time it roars off up the runway, it'll almost be a bit of comic relief.
Comic?
Well, I say comic because we do have our difficulties, and we're always looking for something that's a little bit more straightforward and left on our own.
It sounds as if you don't worry very much about the danger.
No, I don't think you can be a person who worries very much about the danger, if that danger is really there anyway. You've got to have some fear. Otherwise, you're just to go at the thing like a bull-headed animal and take a lot of undue risks. So you have to be frightened on occasions. And I think some degree of fear is it's a fundamentally required quality in a test pilot.
What frightens you? I mean, what stages do you feel this sense of fear?
Well, I think you feel occasionally that you had a bit of a problem on a previous flight and you've got to go and re-examine it. Some tests people don't like doing as much as others, the rather more hairy ones.
Such as?
Well, as the sort of thing I have in mind is spinning on fighter-type military airplanes is not necessarily a very pleasant maneuver. Some stalling can be quite unpleasant. Those are the sort of examples that I mean. A lot of people, of course, rather tend to forget that. They think the test pilots are just sort of dog's body, but in fact, we've got one little whip hand over most of them, is that they can't all fly, and we're the final say-so.
I've never heard of a test pilot being described as a dog's body. Who are the people who describe test pilots as being dog's bodies?
Oh, there are people who would like to slap them down a bit. I think they think they're all rather big for their boots, perhaps.
On the afternoon of April the 9th, Brian Trubshaw was entitled perhaps to be rather big for his boots. Right now, he alone is responsible for the lives of the crew of 6, a plane and a project that has cost £500 million so far and has taken 7 years to complete.
This will feed him into...
22 minutes later, Concorde 002 and Brian Trubshaw came into land, and one last drama. The radio altimeter, the only accurate height indicator, failed, and he had to land a totally strange aircraft entirely by sight. Brian Trubshaw has already won 5 awards for his contribution to aviation, and even though he was never in physical danger from the photographers, the ordeal they exposed him to must almost have been worth another. Yet Trubshaw, self-effacing, professional, hater of ballyhoo, did all that was asked of him by the press, and with John Cochrane, found himself besieged by photographers and Raymond Baxter.
And what did Trubby say? Let's go?
Oh, there was no, he didn't have to say anything. He just said at some one stage, it all looks good, and that was it. Bananas rocks all looked good, and it stayed that way.
I ventured to suggest that when you were coming down the estuary, you would probably have taken time to slide through and get your eyes off the
He filtered very clearly. It was all very pleasant.
Thank you very much, John. Congratulations once again.
Thank you, sir.
Invited.
Monsieur Touquet, Monsieur Touquet. Sorry. Could you put your arm around him, Monsieur Touquet? Monsieur Touquet.
Concorde may face a stormy future. Indeed, even now it might still become an aircraft with no tomorrow, like the Brabazon and the TSR-2. But nothing can ever take away the drama of its first flight, the triumph of a plane called Concorde and a man called Trubshaw.
Brian! Sorry, you took Brian! Mr. Trubshaw, can we do one round at the nose, please?
Well, how do you feel now you've actually done it?
Very good. Very pleased I am. We got it here and we had a splendid flight. I think all the crew liked it. They'd never been in a Concorde before. I was the only one who had been. And I think we're all pretty bucked, to be quite frank.
Would you say this was an important day for you personally? It's obviously very important from the point of view of the aircraft and the aircraft industry as a whole, but for you is it important?
Oh, yes. It's a big day. No doubt about that.
In what way particularly?
Well, it's a great privilege and honour, really, to fly this thing for the first time, the British prototype. And I'm like anybody else. I'm human, I'm pleased and bucked and feel pretty good.